Hello and welcome to This Week in the Garden. For this week's episode, we're going to talk about insect pests in the garden. And I'm going to try to keep this really short and just give you a general tip on how I identify insects, even if you don't have any background knowing the differences between maybe caterpillars and grubs or different types of beetles. You don't really need to know any of that when you're identifying your pests in a garden. And so the first thing that you really need to know is the difference between a beetle and a bug, and that's really the main thing. So bugs aren't just a generic term for all insects. They're referring to a type of insect that mostly has a hard covering, except for the bottom part of its wings, and you'll notice that it looks kind of leathery, and it has a little teardrop shape. That's how you can tell that it's a bug versus a beetle, where it has an entire hard covering. Its wings are entirely hard, and so you can tell the difference. The bottom of the wings look like this on a beetle. It's a U shape usually, and it's completely hard. So aside from that, that's really the most important thing you need to know when you're determining if it's a beetle or a bug. And then you can use what I like to call the Google method. And this is something that I just kind of came up with real quick, but it helps you to figure out what the insect is. So first you need to know if it's a beetle or a bug, and then if it's not one of those, it's probably a caterpillar. So those are really your three main type of pests in your garden. The next thing you need to know is, what is it feeding on? Is it feeding on cucumbers? Is it feeding on your beans? That sort of thing. And then the last thing, you need to describe what it looks like. So is it red? Does it have stripes? Is it all brown? And then with the Google method, you just combine them all together and type it into your search engine, and that should help you figure out what the pest is in your garden. And I know some of you might be thinking, well, that seems a little too easy, but that's really how it works. And I tried this with my wife. I showed her a picture of an insect, and I said, well, can you figure out what this is, given that little information I just told you, the beetle versus bug, and then how to describe it. And so I showed her a picture, and I'll put it on the screen now, of this insect, and I said, is it a beetle or a bug? And she said, I think it's a beetle because of the U shape on the bottom. It looks like it's a completely hard covering. And I said, yes, that's right. And then she said, and then I told her that it was found on a cucumber plant. And then I said, well, what's the last step? And she said, you have to describe it. And it's a yellow beetle with black spots. And so when she typed it into Google, she said, it's a yellow with black spotted beetle on cucumber. And the first thing that came up was a spotted cucumber beetle. And so she matched the two, and that's what the insect is. And that works really well in a vegetable garden, because a lot of our insect pests only feed on one or two types of vegetables. And so it's really easy to figure out with those three descriptions what your insect pest is going to be. Now, if you don't believe me, I have made a quiz, so you can take a look at that and kind of test this out. Of course, it's multiple choice, so you could just type in the names into Google and figure it out that way. But I urge you to try to do it with the Google method and see if you can figure out what the pest is. But that's kind of a quick method to determining what your pest might be in the garden. Of course, you have to find the pest, and the best thing to do is look in areas that are really dark, really kind of crowded in the notches of plants. So for tomatoes, beans, and your squash specifically, those are kind of your dark plants. So that's where you're going to be looking for these pests, on the undersides of leaves. But with that, I hope that you're able to go out in your gardens, check for these pests, and see if you can identify them. And if you have any questions, you can send me an email. But I urge you to take the quiz to see if it actually does work for you. And with that, I hope that you enjoy this episode of This Week in the Garden, and you stay tuned for next week's episode, where I'm going to talk about some beneficial insects in the garden. But that's it for this time on This Week in the Garden.